the summer of 1735, the merchant vessel St. John Pink set sail from the Turkish port of Padras, loaded with grain destined for Italian markets. What began as a routine Mediterranean trading voyage would become one of the most shocking cases of maritime murder and piracy to reach London's Old Bailey courthouse. The St. John Pink was a typical 18th century merchant vessel, her holds packed with Turkish wheat worth a fortune in European ports. Captain Benjamin Hartley, an experienced mariner from Yarmouth, commanded a mixed crew that would soon prove fatally divided in loyalty. Among the crew was Richard Coyle, the ship's mate, a man with 17 years of maritime experience who had earned the captain's trust. Alongside him worked John Richardson, a carpenter who had joined the crew only recently, and Caleb Larson, a Dutch sailor serving as boatswain. The ship's cook, John Davison, completed the adult crew, while 3 young apprentices, Philip Wallace, William Durrant and William Metcalfe, served as the captain's servants. Unknown to Captain Hartley, a deadly conspiracy was brewing beneath the Mediterranean sun. As the St. John Pink departed Padras on August 26, 1735, tensions simmered below deck. The newer crew members, Richardson, Larson and Davison, had apparently hatched a plan to seize control of the vessel and her valuable cargo. What they needed was someone with navigational skills to help them escape with their prize. They set their sights on Richard Coyle. According to later testimony, the conspirators threatened Coyle with death unless he joined their mutiny. The experienced mate found himself caught between loyalty to his captain and fear for his own life as the plotters prepared to strike. In the early hours of August 27th, around 2 o'clock in the morning, the conspiracy exploded into violence. Captain Hartley was awakened by the sound of his crew loading weapons, supposedly for protection against Turkish pirates, but in reality for a far darker purpose. The captain emerged from his cabin to find his crew in open revolt. Realizing the mortal danger he faced, Hartley scrambled up the ship's rigging to the foretop, desperately seeking refuge in the ship's highest reaches while pleading for his life. The scene that followed was one of extraordinary brutality and cowardice. As the captain clung to the rigging high above the deck, his attackers pursued him with loaded firearms and edged weapons. The terrified captain begged for mercy, calling out to individual crew members by name, offering forgiveness if they would spare his life. But the conspirators were beyond reason. Richardson, wielding a broad axe, and Larson, armed with a musket, cornered the captain in the rigging. When Hartley attempted to climb down and surrender, Coyle allegedly fired a musket at him, though the weapon misfired. The captain managed to wrestle the weapon away and attempted to throw it overboard, but his brief moment of defiance only sealed his fate. The conspirators seized him bodily and attempted to throw him into the Mediterranean waters. Hartley caught hold of the ship's rigging, desperately clinging to life as waves crashed below. It was then that Richardson delivered the killing blow. With his carpenter's axe, he struck the captain repeatedly on the head until the mortally wounded man lost his grip and plunged into the dark waters, where he immediately sank beneath the waves. With their captain dead, the mutineers faced the challenge of disposing of the evidence and escaping with their prize. They ransacked Hartley's cabin, destroying his papers and dividing his personal effects among themselves. The ship's weapons were loaded and distributed as they prepared for their new life as pirates. Richard Coyle, whether willingly or under duress, took command of the vessel. New articles were drawn up, transforming the merchant crew into a pirate band with Richardson as mate and Larson as boatswain. The 3 young apprentices, innocent witnesses to the horrific crime, were forced to sign these articles under threat of death. The transformed St. John Pink now sailed as a pirate vessel, but her new commanders soon discovered that their crime had trapped them. When they approached Malta seeking supplies, they found themselves too fearful to enter port, knowing that British authorities might be watching for them. The same pattern repeated at other ports. The need for fresh provisions, warring with the knowledge that capture meant certain death. At the island of Mauritimo, Coyle went ashore, disguised in the dead captain's clothing, attempting to trade the ship's cargo for supplies. The breakthrough came when the pirates anchored off Fovignano, a small island near Sicily. Desperate for provisions but fearful of discovery, they kept the three apprentices under close guard, knowing these witnesses could expose their crimes. But on one fateful night, while the murderers slept, the three young men executed a daring escape plan. Quietly launching the ship's small boat, they rowed through the darkness to shore, where they immediately sought out the local Spanish authorities. Their testimony to the island's governor revealed the full horror of what had transpired aboard the St. John Pink. The Spanish authorities prepared to arrest the pirates, but the mutineers discovered the apprentices' escape just in time. In a desperate flight, they abandoned the ship and escaped in the vessel's longboat, disappearing into the night. The abandoned St. John Pink was secured by Spanish authorities and eventually returned to British control. The three apprentices, having performed quarantine, were eventually repatriated to England, where they would later provide crucial testimony. But the pirates had vanished into the lawless corners of the Mediterranean world. Some reportedly fled to North Africa, where they attempted to blend into the cosmopolitan ports of the Barbary Coast. Nearly 2 years passed before justice caught up with the mutineers. Richard Coyle was eventually captured in Tunis, where he had apparently surrendered to British consular authorities. His fellow conspirators met various fates. Some reportedly converted to Islam or Judaism to avoid prosecution, while others simply disappeared into the criminal underworld of North Africa. Coyle was transported back to England via Gibraltar and Lisbon, arriving in London in chains to face trial at the Old Bailey. On February 24, 1737, Richard Coyle stood in the dock at London's Central Criminal Court, facing charges of both murder and piracy. The three apprentices, now young men, provided devastating testimony about the events aboard the St. John Pink. Coyle's defence was that he had been coerced into participating by threats to his own life. He claimed that Richardson, the carpenter, had been the real leader of the conspiracy and had forced him to participate under threat of death. He maintained that his actions were driven by fear rather than greed. But the weight of evidence against him was overwhelming. 3 credible witnesses testified to his active participation in the captain's murder, and his subsequent command of the pirate vessel demonstrated his willing involvement in the conspiracy. The jury deliberated briefly before returning a verdict of guilty on both charges. The sentence was death, the standard punishment for both murder and piracy in Georgian England. The case of Richard Coyle and the St. John Pink became one of the most notorious maritime crimes of the 18th century. It highlighted the vulnerabilities of merchant vessels operating in distant waters, where disputes between captain and crew could quickly turn deadly. The courage of the 3 apprentices in escaping and reporting the crime demonstrated that even in an age of limited communications, justice could still reach across continents to punish those who thought they could commit murder with impunity. The case also illustrated the international nature of maritime crime in the 18th century, with criminals fleeing across national boundaries and taking refuge in the cosmopolitan ports of the Mediterranean and North Africa. For Richard Coyle, His 17 years of honest service meant nothing in the face of one night of violence and betrayal. Whether he was a willing participant or a reluctant accomplice forced into crime, the law held him equally responsible for Captain Hartley's death. The St. John Pink murders remain a stark reminder that the romantic image of piracy masks a brutal reality of greed, violence, and betrayal that claimed countless lives in the age of sail.